On a hot summer day in 1518 in the city of Strasbourg, a woman stepped out of her home and began to dance. Her name was Frau Troffea. She did not dance to entertain anyone, and no music accompanied her movements. She simply began to move, slowly at first, then relentlessly. Her body caught in a rhythm only she could feel. Hour after hour, she continued in the street outside her house, ignoring the stares of neighbors and the growing concern of her family. When night came, she collapsed from exhaustion. But by morning, she was on her feet again, dancing once more. Within days, her feet were swollen and bleeding. Her movements had lost any sense of joy. They were strained, compulsive, and painful. Yet she could not stop, and before long, something even stranger happened. Others began to join her, not because they chose to, not because they understood what was happening, but because whatever had taken hold of their bodies was no longer under their control, and it was spreading. At first, it was only a handful of people, men and women who stepped into the street and began moving as if pulled by an invisible force. Then dozens followed. By the end of the month, the number had grown dramatically. Contemporary accounts suggest that as many as 400 people were dancing in the streets of Strasbourg, unable to control their bodies, some collapsing from exhaustion, others crying out in agony as they continued to move. This was not a celebration. It was a crisis. Witnesses described dancers screaming for help, begging for relief, their faces twisted in pain. Many danced until their legs failed them. Some suffered heart attacks or strokes. Others reportedly died from sheer exhaustion. At the height of the outbreak, as many as 15 people a day were said to be dying. The city authorities were overwhelmed. Medieval Europe was no stranger to death. Plague, famine, and disease were constant threats, but no one knew how to handle a disaster that looked like this, an epidemic of movement, spreading without any clear cause. Strasbourg's leaders turned to physicians for answers. After dismissing astrological explanations and demonic possession, doctors diagnosed the dancers with a condition they called hot blood. According to medical theory at the time, the human body was governed by 4 humors, and an excess of heat in the blood could cause madness and uncontrollable behavior. The brain, they believed, was overheating. Normally, the treatment would have been bloodletting, but these patients could not stop moving long enough for such a remedy to be applied. Instead, the physicians reached a startling conclusion. The only way to cure the disease was to let it run its course. The city responded by creating spaces for the dancers to continue. Platforms were erected, musicians were hired, professional dancers were brought in to keep the afflicted moving, in the hope that exhaustion would finally break the spell. The result was catastrophic. Rather than calming the outbreak, the music intensified it. Faster rhythms drove the dancers to move harder and longer. Onlookers, misunderstanding the situation, sometimes joined in, mistaking suffering for celebration. What had been a medical emergency became a grotesque spectacle, and the number of afflicted continued to grow. As the death toll rose, officials abandoned the medical explanation. If this was not a bodily illness, then it must be a spiritual one. The mood in Strasbourg shifted from confusion to fear. Many believed that dancing was a curse, a punishment sent by God for the city's sins. Authorities cracked down on gambling, prostitution, and public immorality. Suspected sinners were expelled. Offerings were made at churches. Massive candles were donated in hopes of appeasing divine anger. Still, the dancing continued. In desperation, the city outlawed music and dancing entirely. Violators faced heavy fines. Drums and pipes were banned, believed to provoke uncontrollable movements. Only string music at weddings was permitted, and even that was closely regulated. None of it worked. What made the situation even more disturbing was that Strasbourg's ordeal was not unique. Europe had seen outbreaks like this before. In 1374, more than a century earlier, a similar phenomenon erupted in the city of Aachen and spread along the Rhine Valley. Groups of people danced in circles for hours or days, holding hands, screaming, and collapsing in exhaustion. Authorities at the time blamed demonic possession and attempted exorcisms, drenching dancers with holy water and shouting prayers in their faces. These episodes were often dismissed as madness or moral failure, and when scholars later tried to explain Strasbourg's outbreak, some followed the same pattern. In 1526, the physician Paracelsus studied the case retrospectively. He argued that the dancing was a physical reflex disorder triggered by psychological stress. Yet even he framed his explanation through the biases of his era, singling out Frau Troffea as a rebellious woman whose refusal to perform her household duties had somehow ignited the entire epidemic. Modern historians find this interpretation deeply flawed, but it reflects how poorly understood such events were at the time and how readily blame was assigned. As the outbreak dragged on, Strasbourg turned to a final solution rooted in faith. The afflicted were loaded onto wagons and taken to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, a martyr believed to cure ailments involving tremors and involuntary movement. At the shrine, priests conducted mass over the dancers. They were given small crosses and red shoes, blessed with holy oil on their soles and tops. According to contemporary reports, the effects were remarkable. One by one, the dancers regained control of their bodies. The epidemic slowed, then stopped. The event became known as St. Vitus's Dance, a name that blurred the line between cure and cause. Today, historians and scientists still debate what truly happened in Strasbourg in 1518. Some suggest ergot poisoning caused by mold-infected rye, which can produce hallucinations and convulsions. But ergot does not explain the coordinated movements or the prolonged duration of the dancing. Others propose epilepsy or neurological disorders, yet none of these conditions are contagious. The most widely accepted explanation is mass psychogenic illness, often referred to as mass hysteria. At the time, Strasbourg was under immense strain. The city had endured multiple famines in the decades leading up to 1518. Food prices had soared. Disease was rampant. Smallpox and leprosy were spreading. Hundreds of children had been orphaned. Fear, hunger, and despair were part of daily life. In such conditions, belief carried extraordinary power. People genuinely feared possession and divine punishment. When one person lost control of her body in a public space, it created a terrifying narrative others could step into. Stress, expectation, and belief combined, and the result was an outbreak that moved through the population without any physical pathogen. The cure worked not because of the shoes or the shrine, but because it resolved the fear. It gave meaning to the suffering and convinced the afflicted that the curse had been lifted. The dancing plague of 1518 remains one of the strangest chapters in human history, not because people danced, but because belief itself proved contagious. In a world already on the brink, the mind became both the spark and the fuel for a disaster that left bodies broken and lives lost, all without a single visible enemy. So, what do you think really happened in the streets of Strasbourg that summer? If you enjoy uncovering the strangest and darkest moments in history, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.